Welcome to the Mindfulness in Politics podcast, where every week we are exploring themes and strategies that can help you boost your productivity, find more motivation amid a lot of change taking place in the world, and generally feel better about the work that you're doing, likely under very stressful circumstances. If you're anything like Igor and myself, or you're working in the fields of politics or media or advocacy, or frankly, a lot of things these days. And Igor had an experience recently that I'm really interested in hearing more about as he was moving to a new city that brought up some of these challenges around not going into these anxiety spirals. So, Igor, tell us a little bit about what happened, and then we'll take it from there.
Josh, one of my favorite things about mindfulness has been applying the principles and practices to everyday life and challenges. And some of those challenges are relatively minor, like the one I'm about to discuss. And then there are some of those challenges that you alluded to in the introduction, which seem really large. Let me talk a little bit about the journey I've been on in moving across country from DC to San Diego. It took us about 13 days with two dogs and a fully packed RAV4. But when we finally got to California, we initially stayed with my partner's mom as we were looking for a place of our own out here. And she lives relatively far from San Diego where we've settled. And so when we were doing the house hunting, we could really only go on weekends. And so this one particular weekend, we had all of these apartments and houses lined up that we were going to look at. The first couple really didn't impress us much. And so we were really looking forward to the last viewing. But as we were going to that appointment, the real estate agent reached out and said, "Hey, today's not going to work out. The folks who are the tenants are still there. And so we're just going to have to reschedule." And as soon as I got that message, Josh, I just felt like this pang of disappointment inside of me. I could feel like my entire mood really changed. As my partner and I sat down for lunch, I could just feel myself get really, really, really frustrated. And I recognized in that moment that I had a choice. I could either allow myself to go through this cycle of anxiety, anger, disappointment, and that could color my day, right? That's kind of what I'm used to. Or I could try and break that cycle of frustration by using several techniques. But when we're in that moment where we're like, up, I can feel that frustration coming, we do have a choice. And mindfulness has really opened my eyes to the reality that it is a choice.
Yeah, so there's two things that really jump out to me as you're telling that story. One is the fact that despite a lot of effort and thought about mindfulness and sort of wanting to approach some of this differently, that didn't prevent these moments from coming up for you. And I think that's instructive for everyone, at least for myself, who, when I find that I'm still kind of stuck in those patterns, it's like, okay, well, is all of this a waste? Have I not really accomplished anything? And, why am I not the Dalai Lama yet? That's actually not probably going to happen. I mean, maybe it will be for you. Good luck. So I think first of all, just acknowledging that these setbacks are going to continue to come up is inevitable and is actually not a sign that anything's going wrong or that you're not making progress. Rather, it is a realization. The more that you realize that, the more you're actually aware in the moment of when there's an opportunity, as you say, to make a choice that's different. And that at that moment, when you realize that you're caught once again in that kind of an unhelpful pattern, that is the exact moment where you have agency to make a choice. So tell us a little bit about what you did differently in that moment than what you might have done in the past.
Yeah, and your point about this being inevitable, regardless of how much you've been thinking of mindfulness and meditating and, following the rules, so to speak, is because that's how we're biologically wired. That when something creates an emotional response, that all these chemicals are released that make us feel a particular way and cause the anxiety and the stress. But the good news is that we know from the research that those chemicals take about 90 seconds to cycle out of your body. So something triggers you, you feel upset, you feel angry, that's a chemical reaction. And then after 90 seconds, those chemicals cycle out. And so, if after 90 seconds you are still replaying this in your mind and you're angry and you're annoyed, that's a choice that you're making. And that's not to say that it's easy to just not engage with the thing that just pissed you off. Obviously, it's not. And as I was sitting down for lunch, I felt myself and experienced myself looping that frustration of an appointment being canceled and us having to wait another week until we look at new places, all of that reverberating in my head. And so I realized, okay, I feel like I'm looping, I'm giving energy, more energy to these emotions that I'm feeling. I'm letting it control my day. I'm letting this event shape how everything else is going to go. And so I just kind of made the decision to take a deep breath and to try to focus on how my body was feeling, how I was experiencing all of the different sensations around me. And then when my partner suggested that, hey, maybe we should just go out on a walk and we should look at some other neighborhoods, I was so happy to do that because as we were walking around and walking into stores, my attention was simply elsewhere. It wasn't on the frustration inside me because the frustration inside me wasn't right in front of me, right? And so that kind of grounding, just being intentional about where you choose to point your focus and your attention can really make a big difference. And that's not to say that, oh, just think happy thoughts and everything will go away. But it is to say that even though that disappointment feels so sticky, right? Our brain keeps on coming back to it over and over and over again, we can, with some effort, really redirect our focus. And oftentimes we talk about redirecting that focus onto the tastes, what that air feels like against your skin. And that just creates that all important distance between the negative emotions and what you're experiencing in the moment.
Yeah, I don't know if this analogy makes sense, but it kind of occurs to me that it's like if you've ever been in a casino floor in Atlantic City or Vegas and you see the folks there who are sitting in front of the slot machine and they're just pulling the lever over and over again. And as they're maybe losing and they get frustrated about that, they keep sticking the coins in and it kind of becomes almost like a trance. You're kind of stuck in continuing to re-up this feeling over and over again because it feels so tempting and just kind of like it's pulling you in such a thorough and overwhelming way. And if you can just step away, put the coins down and take a walk even for 5 or 10 minutes, it kind of interrupts that. You're not no longer in that cyclical thing that is really a vicious cycle. And just that distance, as you just described it, really helps to break that chain and redirect your focus and also really what's going on in your mind chemically and biologically to something else in a way that is actually can be pretty surprisingly powerful.
That's a really good analogy, and the other thing maybe to attach to it is habit, right? Is because I am so used to ruminating on that triggering event. And I am so used to having an entire dialogue with someone around something I'm upset about, all of that happening in your head. Those are well worn neural pathways that if that's what you've done for a whole bunch of years, that's just where you're going to go. And I guess what we're saying here is that's a choice. And it's not if you decide, like, okay, I feel like all of this ruminating and all of this just being steeped and saturated in this negativity, that no longer feels good. And so I'm going to go do something else. That's not easy. That's going to, as I was saying, making a small decision, a single decision in that moment of, I'm not going to worry about the apartment falling through. I'm going to go on a walk and clear my head and focus on other things, that's not going to immediately solve this. And next time there's some kind of triggering event, you're still probably going to go into that ruminating space. But every time you make the choice and you consciously pull back and you redirect your focus, over time, you can train yourself to create a different kind of habit and have a different kind of knee-jerk reaction. And so what I'm working on personally is really linking all of those small choices together with the understanding that, over some period of time, that I will be less reactive in those moments and live less in my head than I currently do.
Yeah, and I think when I think through some of the situations where this can be useful, it certainly applies in situations like you described, Igor, where you're trying to accomplish a task and a wrench gets thrown in it and your whole plan gets thrown off. And you cannot get over this mental inclination to fix it and find some way to make it right. And actually, there's a ton of scientific research that talks about how our minds are much more inclined to focus on unfinished tasks, something that's kind of a loose thread that's out there than anything that has been successfully completed. And obviously, you can translate what you were telling us about looking for an apartment to some type of work related task, but you can also think of this in terms of longer term or broader things that really get you thrown off track. So it might be a dynamic with a family member that is just not working the way that you want it to, or a relationship with a boss that just seems to continually be counterproductive and at cross purposes, and you just feel like it's thwarting you from being able to accomplish what you want. Or it can be longer term goals that you've set for yourself and are just not feeling like you're making progress, or you see other people who are accomplishing things that you really want to, and that for whatever reason, it's just not clicking into place for you the way that you want it to. These are all examples of kinds of situations where, at least for me, I get stuck in that loop where every time I tell the story to myself again, it kind of re-ups that cycle in a way that's really not helpful, and where creating some of that distance and shifting the focus even for a brief amount of time can really help get you off of that train.
Part of our project here is to offer folks different tools they can use to be more mindful and hopefully to be less stressed and less anxious. We're talking about choosing not to focus on that negative triggering event and instead moving the focus away from your head and maybe into how your body is feeling. And it's worth mentioning, and Josh, should do a full episode on self compassion and the role that self compassion can play in ameliorating self criticism and worry and anxiety. There's a way to think about it that says to yourself, Igor, why are you being so hard on yourself? You literally just moved to California like a week ago. Of course, it's going to take time to find an apartment and figure out where you're going to live. And nobody says that you have to do this in 5 days after you get here. So realize that it takes time and eventually you'll get there. That, I think, especially for me personally, and I suspect for a lot of high achievers out there, many of whom we've worked with, right? There's like this tendency to get it right and get it right away. And, it expresses itself in all kinds of different ways, being first, being the best, etc. It can really create, I think, a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress. And so taking some time to just not be so hard on yourself and to give yourself some, I don't know if it's love or compassion, could also really be a helpful tool in this.
Well, on that note, the good news is, Igor, you did find a new home. It's amazing. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and there are tools that you can start to use to even make that process or whatever you're going through a little bit less difficult for yourself. So we've got a lot more, Igor was alluding to, coming up in the weeks ahead, and we will see you again on the Mindfulness in Politics podcast.